We Unitarian Universalists talk a lot about beloved community. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke a lot about beloved community. And according to the King Center's website, quote, Dr. King's beloved community is a global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth. In the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow it. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. In the beloved community, international disputes will be resolved by peaceful conflict resolution and reconciliation of adversaries, instead of military power. Love and trust will triumph over fear and hatred. Peace with justice will prevail over war and military conflict. Now, this isn't just a lofty aspirational goal where we humans will all hold hands and sing Kumbaya together. This isn't just about reading and learning and becoming anti-racist. This isn't just about bringing diversity into our, let's be honest, very white denomination. No, the work of beloved community is more than just words and feelings and attitudes. Because beloved community doesn't just happen. We have to work for it. It requires justice, not just for any one group, but for all people everywhere. That is what King was working towards. That is our work, that work is ours to do. Always has been. And it's needed now more than ever. Historically, we as Unitarian Universalists have a mixed record when it comes to building beloved community, especially around racism. And while we've done the good work in fighting racism, we were part of the civil rights movement, and in the late 90s, we passed a resolution to officially become an anti-racist, anti-oppression, multicultural, or ARAMC, A-R-A-O-M-C, ARAMC is what a lot of people call it, organization. And we've missed the mark many times. As I've preached about before, we voted against adding language to our bylaws after the merger to make our congregations integrated. We have failed to remain committed to our funding promises for marginalized groups within the UUA. Even the funding and support for the ARAOMC began to wane in the 2000s, barely 3 years after approving it. UUs also have a mixed record historically in other areas of racial justice. We had people on both sides of abolitionism, including people like Jefferson, who was a slaveholder. And Unitarians were proponents of eugenics, leading to some of the racial extremes of Nazism and apartheid in South Africa. Also, there were Unitarian residential schools here in the US that caused great damage to our indigenous neighbors. We don't always get it right. We've caused harm. I don't think we have meant to. I hope we have not meant to. But for those of us who identify as white, it's so easy to ignore these issues because they do not affect us. And that's human nature. But it's also the definition of privilege. However, it is this ignoring of issues that has allowed systemic racism to continue to exist and get worse. Jamar Tisby, in his book, The Color of Compromise, The Truth About the American Church's Complicity in Racism, he says, "We worry that we do not know enough yet, that our good intentions may have unintended negative consequences, or that the very people we seek to serve will rebuke us for our ignorance or missteps. I cannot say this will not happen. Standing for racial justice involves risk, but effective advocacy is a skill just like any other, and skills can be learned. Ultimately, though, you cannot read your way, listen your way, or watch your way into skillful advocacy. At some point, you must act." We Unitarian Universalists are really good about reading, listening, and watching about how to be anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural. But it's not enough. Our knowledge and our words are not enough. If we are to achieve beloved community, true beloved community, we must act. So what does that look like, you may be asking? It means showing up. It means speaking up. It means listening to people of color and helping in how they ask us to help, not coming in and trying to change it to fit our needs. It means acknowledging our culture of white supremacy within our nation, our state, and even our denomination. Now, we're not the only denomination reckoning with our inherent white supremacy culture. In his book, Tisby shares this: the Southern Baptist Convention, the SBC, the nation's largest Protestant denomination that had been founded to protect slaveholders within its ranks, finally apologized for its racist roots. They issued a resolution repenting of racism and slavery at their annual meeting on the 150th anniversary of the denomination, a statement which read in part, quote, "We lament and repudiate historic acts of evil, such as slavery, from which we continue to reap a bitter harvest, and we recognize that the racism which yet plagues our culture today is inextricably tied to the past." Let that sink in. The Southern Baptist Convention publicly coming out and stating that they recognize their racist roots and then apologizing for it. Now, I don't know about you, but that kind of blew me away when I read it. In fact, I'll admit I had to read it a few times, which then, of course, led me to look at our own Unitarian Universalism and what has sparked today's sermon. We have not always gotten it right. We're human. We're messy. We make mistakes. The trick is whether or not we admit to them. And we're really good at talking about what we have done that was right. We talk about how our ministers and lay people marched in Selma. And we talk about how our ministers and lay people helped get women to safe abortion providers in the time before Roe v. Wade was law. And some of us are preparing to do that again. We talk about how the UUA supports Black Lives of UU or Blue, but we don't always talk about the missteps, the mistakes, the harm. Jemar Tisby reminds us, quote, "Jumping ahead to the victories means skipping the hard but necessary work of examining what went wrong with race and the church. And that can lead to simplistic understandings of the past and superficial solutions to racial issues in the present." Superficial solutions to racial issues in the present. And if you weren't already aware, I do hate being the one to tell you, we do not have a good track record when it comes to how we handle racial issues here in our denomination. I mentioned earlier about voting against requiring integration in our congregations. I've preached before about the Thomas Jefferson Ball that was held at one of our General Assemblies, even after many people voiced confusion and pain over why we would do that. I've preached before about the situation in 2017 when it was brought to light that our hiring practices were not in line with what we said we stood for. And I've preached before about how the person in the middle of that 2017 event later received death threats at her own church. I've preached before about how ministers of color have a harder time in their congregations due to micro and macro aggressions. It's daunting. It's heartbreaking. It's infuriating. So how do we fix it? We read, we study, we listen, we watch. Yes, all of that. And we have to do more. Ibram X. Kendi, who was our Ware lecturer at General Assembly this year, said in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, if we don't do the basic work of defining the kind of people we want to be in language that is stable and consistent, we can't work towards stable and consistent goals. We need language to be stable and consistent to give us something to work for. Now, Unitarian Universalism is a non-creedal faith tradition, which means we do not dictate from upon high what you have to believe to be a UU. We do, however, agree to covenant together to affirm and promote 7 principles. These principles guide us, or should guide us, on how we are to be with each other and the wider world. And they are aspirational, very aspirational. They require work. Our first principle, that's a daily reminder for me to remember that other people have inherent worth and dignity, even when I don't like them or what they're doing. And that's hard. And you heard earlier about the proposal for an additional principle. It's known as the 8th Principle Project. So what is the 8th principle? Well, it starts like the other 7. We, member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote. Translated, that means by becoming a member of a Unitarian Universalist congregation that is a member of the Association of Congregations, i.e. the UUA, we have made a promise with one another that we will affirm, agree to, and promote, act out the principles listed below that. And here is the text of the 8th principle that's being proposed. Journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Before you say anything, I have heard all about this principle. It's wordy. This is already stated in the other 7 principles. It doesn't flow with the other principles. We're already doing this, so why do we need to say it? Here's the thing. If we're already doing the work, why wouldn't we say it? Our principles are how we define to the world who we are. Okay, it doesn't flow with the other principles. Guess what? The UUA bylaws state we're supposed to review the principles every so often, which we haven't done in a while and are currently doing, and rewrite them if necessary. The Article 2 Commission is working on that now. And who knows, maybe it will flow beautifully with the other 7 when they're done. But it's already stated in the other 7. It's implied in the other 7. I'll give you that. But according to the 8th Principle website, quote, Paula Cole-Jones, Joseph Priestley District Director of Racial and Social Justice, developed the idea of the existence of 2 different paradigms in UU circles, the UU 7 principles and beloved community, deep multiculturalism. After working with congregations on these issues for over 15 years, she realized that a person can believe they are being a good UU and following the 7 principles without thinking about or dealing with racism and other oppressions at the systemic level. Evidence: most UU congregations are primarily European American in membership, culture, especially music, and leadership, even when located near diverse communities. So yes, it may be alluded to in the other 7, but that's not enough. Again, from the website, quote, the 8th principle came from a feeling that we need something to renew our commitment to this work, to hold ourselves accountable, and to fulfill the potential of our existing principles. Now we come to the one that I hear most often. It's too wordy. Friends, I want you to hear this with all the love that I have in my heart for you. Our siblings of color in our denomination have asked us to do this. This is the language they have chosen. It was written by a woman of color. To have our first response to be to wordsmith it to death without being asked to do so, as we have so often done in our history, especially as Unitarians, is a symptom of white supremacy culture. Now, before you all mishear me, I'm not saying that all editing is white supremacy culture. I'm speaking about this very specific case of rewriting something a person of color has written to make it easier for our white ears and minds, especially without being asked to do so. The 8th principle is an active principle, and I honestly hope the other 7 are rewritten as active phrases, but that's my own personal opinion. But this one is saying, please make it part of our bylaws. Please make it part of who we say we are, that we are actively working to be anti-racist, not only in the world, but here in our faith tradition. This is an opportunity to put our money and our actions where our mouths have said we are. And it reminds me so much of 1963. Back then, we didn't have the courage to put our stance against racism in our bylaws. And it was even said that while we all agreed to it, it didn't need to be codified. But looking back through our denominational history tells me that it did. And it does now. Our purpose of being here is to build beloved community. We work it out and get messy here in this covenanted space where we have promised to come back to the table and work it out when we mess up. We do that so then we can go out and do it in the world. The 8th Principle Project website reminds us, quote, the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration, and the criminal justice system replacing the older systems of slavery and Jim Crow laws, police violence against people of color, recent Supreme Court decisions on voting rights and affirmative action, and the election of Donald Trump with advisors and followers, including Attorney General Jeff Sessions, openly supporting white supremacists shows the country that the country is moving quickly and dangerously in the wrong direction. You need to take strong leadership to reverse these trends. Now is the time, my friends. Now is the time to take strong leadership and do the work of bending that arc towards justice. Now is the time to take the bold stance that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. asked us to do when he spoke at our General Assembly. Now is the time to rise up and say that racism is immoral and has no place in our faith tradition, our country, or the world. Will you join me in doing this work of building a beloved community? Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so.